Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to episode 2 of Player Movement. We are going to be covering today the top-down movement. So it works a little bit differently, but I have all the scripts set up and I'm going to show you exactly what I did to get started. So let's jump into it, shall we? Alright, so basically I designed the player image and I imported them in, and I created the folder player, and I also created a player bullet. Now, is what you'd want to do when you create your player is you want to drag him into the inspector. I created an empty and I resetted his transform by just right clicking on the little cog right here and click reset, and it took him. Basically, the zero transform is right here in the dead center middle. Anyway, I created this empty and I named it player. I added a Rigidbody 2D component by going to component, physics 2D, and I scrolled down to where it said Rigidbody 2D. So I added the component. Now I turned the gravity to 0 because if we had it on 1, when we click play, the gravity will pull him down on the y-axis. We don't want that. We want him to stay where he is. So no gravity for this one. And I also went to the constraints and I froze the z-axis because the z-axis is from the camera to the player. We don't use that in two-dimensional design. So it's a good indication if you bump into something, the physics is going to try to bump you towards the z-axis, and that's why I freeze that. So my actual image of the player, I named it the player object. We added a circle collider 2D to it, and if yours is not a circular object, then you might not want to use that. You might have a more square. They have a polygon type deal that you can use. There's different colliders, so whatever best suits you, go ahead and use that. But you can click this and you can edit the collider here. As you can see, I have it perfectly sized to exactly the way that I want it. And that's how your player will interact with walls, things that are projectiles that are shot at you from enemies. Later down when we get into that, you're going to want to have that on there. Now, we're going to be doing some shooting in this one. So you see that I have a red dot right here. That's the bullet spawner. I basically just right clicked the player and I created an empty. Automatically its transform is going to take that of its parent, which we already had it reset. So I added a gizmo by clicking right here, and I went with the red circle. You can do whatever you want, but I was just sticking to the color scheme, and I figure that is. But that's where our bullet is going to spawn from. Now later on in other tutorials where we get into animations and we get into the player having different weapons, you know, like maybe right here he has a cannon and we can switch in between it. Maybe he has a sword back here. All that's going to be stored inside the player, the empty game object, and that way when the player turns, you don't have to put the same rotation on that unless you want to, and I'll show you in the code exactly how that works. But for right now, this is exactly what you should need, is the empty game object, your image, and it should be rigged up with just a a circle collider, and the actual game object itself is going to be the rigid body, which we're going to be moving. So anything that you put inside here, a sword, a gun, anything will rotate with it. But if we want to put rotations on these objects inside of this, it will not affect it. So you can kind of see how I did that in the side scroller tutorial. Now, as far as the level design, I created another empty, reset it, transform to 0, and I added a quad, which you can basically just go to create, 3D object, quad, and then I drug that image of the plane that I designed, which is what you're seeing, this ugly plane texture. When you drag it into there, it's going to create a material based upon the image name. So it does that for you, and that's what my background is right now. Later down the road, this isn't the most efficient way to do it, but for right now I was just doing it quickly. You don't have to worry about elite graphics. We're just getting you moving and doing the basics, and we'll keep it moving till we get you where you want. The walls, I created 4 of them, which you see on each side. And I actually did create a tag, which if you want to do that, you go to tag and you'll click add tag, and then you'll type in the name. You'll click a space bar, a plus sign, and then you would add the name that you want in there, and then you hit enter. So I have the player bullet 01, and like I said, later down the road we'll have multiple player bullets. We don't want them to behave the same way, so that's why I do it like that. And then you'll have wall, you'll have ground, you'll have floor, and all that kind of stuff. So all the walls have the wall tag, and that's how we determine when, like the bullet, when it hits the wall, we need to know that it touched that collider. Now, about the bullet, you'll take whatever projectile, like I designed this image right here. You're going to want to drag it into here, and you're going to want to rig it up with the tag of the player bull, play bull, whatever you want to put in there. Just add your tag. I froze the rotation on the Rigidbody because you do need a Rigidbody 2D. Once again, you do not want any gravity on this. And I froze the rotation on the Z-axis, which will be a pretty common thing in 2D game design. So just so you know, that's what we're going to do. I actually added a polygon collider to this one, and you can actually see that I didn't finish it. So I need to finish editing it. Okay, and I think that I'm good with that right there. So it does auto save in the prefab mode, and I'm going to show you how to make a prefab in a minute. Now notice also that I did make the bullet an is trigger, so you do want to make sure that this is checked. And then I added a player bullet 01 script, which I have down here. So there's the player bullet 01 and the player move, and those are the 2 scripts that we will be working with in this tutorial. In order to make your bullet a prefab, you're going to drag it in here. You're going to put the 2D, you're going to put the Rigidbody 2D collider, the Rigidbody 2D on there. You're going to put your collider, whatever it is. You're going to get the collider right. You're going to put the script on it that I'm going to show you in a minute. Then you want to create a folder, prefabs, and I went with bullet prefabs, and then I went with player bullets because later on we might have enemy bullets and all that stuff, and it's nice to be able to keep it organized. So once you create your folder, you will drag your bullet into there, and then you'll notice that the bullet will have like a blue color to it, and that's what a prefab actually is. It's an instance that can be created even from the project folder. So let me show you how that actually works. On the player movement, we want to have a private rigid body, and I named it player RB for player's rigid body. On the start, we will actually get that component because the script is on the player. We can actually directly access its rigid body. Now if not, we'd have to do some more coding, or we'd want to put it as a public and drag them in there. Now we declared a vector2 and I named it movedir for move direction. Now what is a vector2 and a vector3? Let's look at our inspector. Inside of the transform, you see a vector3 right here, an X, Y, and the Z. In 2D game development, the X and the Y. So the Y is up and down, it's negative down here, it's positive up here, it's negative to the left, and it's positive to the right. So that's pretty much how the vectors work. In 3D development, you would need the Z axis, but we don't really use that for the movement that we're using here as a vector2. Our positions will be either +1 or -1 because we're using get axis raw. Now if we just use get axis, then that's assuming that you want to slowly speed up, so it'll do 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, all the way up to 1. And then if you're moving to the left, it'll do the same thing, -0.1, -0.2, and all the way up to -1. With get axis raw, when you hit to the left, you're either going to be -1 to move left, or you're going to be +1, so it just jumps straight in there. There's no smoothness in between. This is how you move to the horizontal, and if you notice, the movedir is going to equal a new, because we're in the update function, so it runs this function once, I guess every second. There's like 120, 150 frames that are ran, and that's how animation actually works. So every second it's doing a whole bunch of frames. We got to put new information into the x-axis, which is either going to be +1 or -1, and the y-axis, which is going to be +1 or -1. So this is up and down, and this is left and right, and it's stored inside of our vector2, which is movedir, and we have it marked right here. Now when we get into shooting, we need a float for the speed, and I set it to a floating point of 5, which 5f would be the equivalent of 5.0. I created a header just to make it look a little bit more clean. So when you look, you see player components and player attributes. These are the headers right here, and this is what it contains. So it makes your inspector look a little bit cleaner, and I advise you to use these. So our player components consist of the bullet spawn and the player bullet. So the bullet spawn's very easy. It's the bullet spawner, and you can see that I pulled it in here. Now the player bullet is actually this prefab, so you have to make this a prefab, and then you just drag the prefab straight into that slot, and now it can access it at any time. And you can adjust this. I got it really slow right now, but you can adjust the speed however you want by clicking and just setting it to what you want, and that's why it's a public. So inside of our update, every second, 120 frames or whatever, 150, it's going to check these functions that I designed: move up, move down, move left, move right, and fire a weapon. Our movement is initialized up here, but inside of a fixed update, because a fixed update, it kind of does like every 50 frames, I believe, per second. So this is where we're actually going to move. This makes us move smoother. You know, if we had done all of our moving in the update, some frames, it might look a little a little icky when you move. You know, this cleans it up because you're only moving in between these frame calls over here. So we call our rigid body and we want it to move to a position. Whatever our player's rigid body current position is, we're going to add the move dir, which is whatever is happening here. We're going to multiply it by move speed. Now, through the basic order of operations, I prefer to be clean, and I put it inside of the parentheses. So is what it's going to do is it's going to add this up, and then it's going to add to the position, or maybe it'll go here. Now time.fixed delta time is like time.delta time, but in the fixed update, this is what's going to really make the smoothness happen. This is the magic right here. After all of our calculations are done, which is a fixed update, this is where the calculations, that's what a fixed update is best for, calculations. So anyway, that's all there is to us moving. Now, to move up, down, left, right, and fire the weapon, I designed these functions right here. So if the input.get key, so as long as we're holding down the W key, or, and that's what this symbol is right here, this means or, we hit the up arrow. So if we touch the W or the up arrow, the rigid body's transform dot Euler angles is going to equal a new vector 3, and it's going to take it back. So in other words, we're already facing the 0, 0, 0 vector 3 right now. We do rotate on the Z axis, but we're only using X and Y. So it's going to take us back to facing this way. Now if your character, when you design it, it's facing downwards, then you can still use this code right here. It's not going to be a problem, because when you move down, it's going to flip it 180 degrees on the Z axis. It's the exact same code as this, but it's going to flip it 180, and then when you hit upwards, it's going to take you back to the Z, to the 0 rotation. When we move left, same thing. You know, if you hit the A or you hit the left arrow, it's going to flip you 90 degrees. And if you hit the right arrow or the D, it is going to flip you negative 90 degrees. So that's how your directions are moving, and it's through this calculation of the Euler angles. And it's just setting it to a new vector 3, so it updates every single time in the update. To fire the weapon, I gave you a few things that you can use in your arsenal. The space bar, or if you hit the left click, get mouse button down. Now if you notice, these are get keys and these are get key down. Get key down only fires as soon as you push the button down. Get key, you can hold it down. That's the difference. Get key up is when you release. So get mouse button down. The 0 element is the left click, 1 would be the right click, and your mouse wheel, it is a button also, that would be number 2. Just so you know, if you want to do anything with that, that's how you can do it. Or if you hit the right shift, or if you hit the left shift, these are all the ways we can fire. Now I will say, if you hit the right or the left, you got to make sure on Windows, PC, that they have sticky keys. You want to disable the sticky keys, or else you're going to keep getting a message that's annoying that's going to pop up. So how does the magic of actually firing your bullet work? Well, we're going to create a game object. We're creating a variable, and we're going to call it bull. For bullet, it's going to equal instantiating. Now when you instantiate something, you're bringing something into the game, and you're actually instantiating something new. I want to use this later, so that's why I stored it into a variable. Playable. Well, up here we have a game object that is playable, and it's what we put in the inspector, which is our prefab. That's what's in there. So now we're instantiating that bullet. we're going to do it at the bull spawn position, which is this red dot. This is the bull spawn because it's the bullet spawner is right here. So it's going to, at this point, it's going to instantiate a game object, a bullet. And we're going to go with the bull spawn's rotation. So what that's saying is if we're facing to the left, it's going to have the same rotation that that bull spawn has. If we're facing right, it's going to have the rotation of the negative 90 degrees right there. So we're taking in this here. And that way your bullet always knows which way to go. And we're going to tell it to do that. We create a new private variable, which is local. This is the local variables that we're creating here. I call it the bullet rigid body. And it equals whatever this bull is right here. So it's going to instantiate this bullet at that rotation and at that position. We're going to get the component of the rigid body. So we're actually getting that component, and we're going to have the bull RB, which is this. We're going to add force to it. This is how we're going to move it. We want the bull spawn dot up. So whichever way the bullet spawn is facing, whatever rotation, we want it to go up. We're going to multiply that by our bull speed, and we want to add the force mode 2D, which is the impulse. Now you don't have to use this right here, but I'm destroying this game object that was instantiated after 5 seconds. And the destroy does take these two parameters. It's a floating and it's a game object. So you just got to tell it what to do. So in other words, if we don't hit a wall or nothing happens and it's just flying into space forever, eating up memory, after 5 seconds, we'll just go ahead and delete it. And that's what that does. Okay, now for the bullet, this is it for its script. We need, because it is an is trigger, so we want to, what happens when it enters? When its trigger collider enters another collider of any kind, it'll be the collision. So if collision, what we collide with, dot tag, equals the wall, then we're going to destroy the game object. Now later on, I'll get into advanced to where we'll have particles jumping off and stuff will be cool, you know, explosions, and it's going to be different. We won't use this. We will, but in a different format. But for now, this is all you need to do, is to put this simple script on the bullet. And that is pretty much everything that you need to know for this tutorial right here. Let me make sure that I went over that the colliders do have a wall. I mean, the wall does have a collider. My bad. And it is tagged wall. So that's what we're accessing right here. Now normally, because I'm having PC problems with performance, when I click the play, it does make the video lag and I normally end up cutting it out. But I want to give you a demonstration of what it would look like, and hopefully it doesn't lag. So you can shoot, and you notice that he moves around. And that's it. The next video, I'm going to get into designing an enemy that can attack you, and we're going to be able to attack it. So I think I'm just going to do the attack part, and then I'll get into where we can destroy the enemy. The next video after that, I believe I'll do to where we will set up to where the player can die, and we'll get into health bars and all that stuff. And we're starting to get into the really fun stuff now, so definitely tune back in for the next one. I appreciate you watching. Please like and subscribe, and I hope you enjoyed another Skits Tut by Mr. Skits.